Told you already that I wouldn't bore you with most of the details of my time in Vietnam. I also won't ever refer to it as Nam, as I found after returning home. It's the rear echelon assholes who spent the war pencil pushing who most like to put on a husky voice and say Nam in some deep and mournful way. Short story is, after the incident in the tunnels west of Da Nang, Benoit and I were a little messed up, so we were useless for tunnel work. Both of us were transferred into 2 separate regular platoons in the mechanized infantry. About a month after that, I was on a search and destroy mission when a rookie stepped over a VC tripwire, which was connected to one of our own captured claymores. The claymore blew the rookie's legs off and lodged a bunch of metal and bone fragments in the side of my torso. I survived, and for my trouble, I got a ticket home. Well, I say home, but I really got a ticket to a military hospital called Camp Zama in Japan. They managed to pull most of the bits of shrapnel out of my torso over 2 operations. The hospital was dangerously overcrowded. At night, the screaming of the other patients was horrendous, and the stench reminded me of the fucking tunnel. I was actually happy when, due to overcrowding, I was transferred to a much older building in the complex. It was some type of disused asylum ward, total wreck. It only had maybe 15 patients, mostly guys with minor injuries, but I didn't care. It was far enough away from the main buildings that I didn't have to hear the poor bastards screaming for their mothers every night. I was on the mend, which was a blessing and a curse. My tour wasn't up, and if I was declared fit to serve, I might be sent back to Vietnam, and I wasn't going back. Not after what I saw in that tunnel. 2 American military doctors and a female Japanese nurse arrived to assess my situation late one evening. "Your injuries seem to be healing quite well," said one stern-faced doctor. "Physically, at least," said the second doctor, who wore narrow glasses. The first doctor gave him a look that could cut glass. The doctor wearing the glasses was clearly a psychiatrist. He would have to be my ticket home, if I could convince him I had lost my mind. But I couldn't overplay my hand. The nurse just stood behind them, diligently taking notes. "How is your emotional state? Have you had any troubling thoughts? I understand you were a tunnel commando," probed the psychiatrist. "Yes, I sometimes have nightmares about the things I saw in the tunnels. I sometimes think about harming myself." I put a quiver into my voice to add to the effect, but neither of them were buying it. I've never been a good liar. How fucked up a situation was this, that after the shit I saw, I needed to fake being mentally unstable just to get a ticket home? I was despondent and I dropped the act. Much as I wanted to go home, I couldn't tell them about what happened in the tunnels. I wanted to go home, but not to be thrown into a mental asylum. "What kind of things did you see in the tunnels?" the psychiatrist asked calmly. "Doc, near Da Nang, I went down into the deepest, darkest tunnel you can imagine, and if I told you what I saw in that tunnel, you wouldn't believe me anyway, so just write whatever you need to on your clipboard and leave me be." The stern-faced doctor was unimpressed with my tone, but as I was speaking, the Japanese nurse stopped taking notes. Her face went deathly pale and she stared at me with a look of terror on her face. "Well, we'll check on you again tomorrow. Try to get some rest," said the psychiatrist, who had a curious look on his face, and with that they all shuffled off. The nurse stared back at me as they went, her face still pale with fear. I went to sleep that night knowing that soon they would send me back to Vietnam. I awoke late that night to the whispering voice of a woman. I couldn't hear where it was coming from. I got out of bed and walked uneasily, rolling my drip along with me. The woman's voice was coming from the next corridor. It must be that nurse, I thought, but the voice sounded all too familiar. I wasn't going to walk these halls without a weapon. I searched the unnamed nurse's station, found a scalpel in one of the drawers, and that would have to do. I shuffled through the large wooden doors leading to the next corridor. The light bulbs flickered in the dimly lit corridor. The paint was peeling off the walls. Far to the end of the corridor, I could see the shape of a woman standing near a window, looking out into the night. I shuffled toward her with a scalpel leading the way, rolling my drip with my left hand. As I approached, the faint whispers became louder, and I could finally make out the words. "Defiler, come to the red house," it whispered. My drip caught in a cracked tile on the floor, making an awful clanking sound. The woman turned and moved quickly toward me. My heart raced in terror. I prepared the scalpel. "You shouldn't be out of bed." It was the nurse, a lit cigarette in her hand. She must have been smoking by the window. Her English was near perfect. She must have been the daughter of an American GI. Many of them married Japanese women after the Second World War ended. "Why were you whispering to me?" I asked, still pointing the scalpel. "I wasn't whispering," she said, confused and frightened. "You were whispering. You called me Defiler. What does that mean?" I demanded, my hand clutching the scalpel. Once again, her face took on the same pale, terrified look. The cigarette dropped from her hand. "You're not safe here in Japan, or back in Vietnam. They'll be looking for you." Her voice trembled as she spoke. Who will be looking for me?" I implored her. "I don't know what they call themselves. Every place has a different name for them. The Silent Plague is the translation of what we call them here in Japan. All I know for certain is that they will be looking for you. Maybe you will be safe if you get back to America." Her words offered little comfort. "You have to help me. You have to convince the doctors that I'm crazy," I said to her, almost begging. "I will try. Give me the scalpel," she said calmly. I handed her the scalpel, and as quick as I had handed it to her, she slashed it across my arm. I roared out in pain. She dropped the scalpel and grabbed my hand, putting pressure on the wound. "This is the only way," she said. I instantly realized her plan. 2 orderlies came rushing into the old corridor from an adjoining corridor, alerted by my screams. "Get me some bandages, he's trying to kill himself," she roared at the man. One of the orderlies ran for the bandages, the other ran over to support me. I slunk down into the orderly's arms, more from pageantry than blood loss. The wound wasn't that deep. I had suffered much worse before. She had done a good job. I was put back in bed and stitched up, and the next night I was visited by the psychiatrist, alone. He looked at me coldly, noted something on my chart and asked, "Have you been hearing voices or whispers?" "No," I replied quickly. "It's funny, we had a young soldier from Louisiana in here about 3 weeks before you arrived. He was also a tunnel commando. He claimed he was hearing whispers, but he could never tell me what they said. We had to send the poor fellow home." The psychiatrist maintained his usual cold, clinical composure, but his eyes seemed to burn with a fanatic rage. "If you did hear whispers, and they told you anything, a secret maybe, you would tell me, wouldn't you?" "I'm not hearing any voices or whispers," I responded with as much resolve as I could muster. The rage slowly faded from his eyes. "You are being transferred to a hospital in the US. You'll be assigned a psychiatrist there," he said before pausing. "I hope that when you get home you will find whatever it is in life you are searching for." And with that he smiled and walked away. He knew I was lying to him. That very night I was driven to the airport and pushed in a wheelchair into a C-130 by an MP. The flight was filled with men who were broken physically or mentally, and most probably a few guys like me, just desperate not to go back to Vietnam. But unlike them, I was actually hearing voices. But I wasn't crazy. The flight took off. I breathed a sigh of relief. I removed my dog tags, praying I would never ever need them again. I opened the zipper on my bag to put the dog tags inside. And there, staring back at me, was a small, crudely made clay replica of that golden statue that I had seen in the tunnels. So Ayme, what do you think of this series? I think it's quite intriguing. I haven't actually read ahead, so keep spoilers to a minimum for me too, alright? If you're still listening, I would really appreciate it if you'd help me share this around, and if you haven't yet, subscribed. And I hope to see you in the next part, maybe?